My name is Brian, and I'm lead pastor at Foothills Church. And I have been serving here for in my 26th year. So in a few months, I will be starting my 27th year at Foothills Church. And yes, I'm old. I was born and raised in Ohio, and many people from California mistake Ohio for Iowa, but it's actually east of the Mississippi. And I was raised in a little country church, and my home was about an hour and about a mile and a half from the church. And my mom and dad were very much involved. My sister and I we weren't super close, but we weren't the kind of siblings that fought all the time either. So it was just my sister. She's 2 years older than I am, and we were just happy clams living out in the country. It was about 4 or 5 miles outside of our little town of Ashland, Ohio, and we had a great childhood. My parents were very involved in church. My mom worked a job which in those days, back in the 60s and early 70s, that was not common for, moms to be working. But my grandmother lived in the same town, and so she was able to be there with us, after school and those sorts of things. So we were never alone, and we were never neglected or anything like that. My dad, he was in commercial refrigeration, and he probably when I was about in the 5th or 6th grade, he started his own company. He stopped working for other people and wanted to work for himself. So he started Long's Refrigeration, and the early days of that were rugged because he was having to work all sorts of hours, and a lot of times his accounts were, bars and beer joints or whatever around that would call him at like 2 a.m. Their cooler, their chiller, or whatever wasn't working, and he had to jump out of bed and go service those accounts. And so early on, he had a lot of little accounts that kept him running. But over time, he grew it into larger kinds of accounts that he didn't have to be out in the middle of the night and all of that. But we had a great relationship with my parents. My dad, he was busy a lot, but he managed to break away and take me fishing, and as I got older, we went hunting and things like that. And so there was a fair amount of that kind of connection with my dad. And when I started playing sports, my dad would always roll up right about game time, or he would get home just in time to take me to practice or whatever. So I always felt like he was very present. And so I had a solid relationship with my dad, but my mom and I, let's just say it was always a little rough. But she still was, both my mom and dad were great providers, and they did their best. And, we all have to kind of work through our issues that we carry from our family of origin. But all in all, had a great family, had some cousins around, and aunt and uncle and that sort of thing. And we have great holiday times and birthday times and all of that. So it was a good, solid family. And I came to know Christ early on in my life because my parents were very involved in this little country church that was near our home. And it was a funny little church. It was a little Methodist church before the Methodists really went sideways, but it was a church that Methodist kind of leadership would place pastors there right before they retired. So our pastors would only stay 2, 3, 4 years maybe, and they would move on. And but one morning I was with my mom and dad in church, as was our custom. And this morning, for some reason, I wasn't in Sunday school. I was actually laying on the pew on my back with my back of my head laying on my mom's lap. And I have no idea what the pastor was speaking about. And yet, at the end, he started giving an invitation, and something really just grabbed a hold of me and stirred me in my heart. And I remember sitting up and him saying, if you want to, invite Jesus to be your personal leader and your personal Lord and Savior, come down to the front altar. And this altar was a big brass rail with a big heavy flannel curtain on it and a cushion, kneeling kind of railing. And so I went up and I knelt, and he prayed with me, and I was probably 6 years old. So the next week or the couple weeks later, same thing happened, and I went forward again. That's when my mom told me on the way home and explained more of what was going on, and that I didn't need to give my life to Jesus every week. But there was something in my heart that was super tender, and I was even at that young age, had a really clear feeling that I needed to have a Savior. So I can't explain that. It's really an interesting phenomenon to me to be that age. But I had a couple other things happen to me along in those formative years, which I can't explain now, which I'll talk about in a minute. But that conversion experience was meaningful and solid, and I kept going to Sunday school and went to VBS and did all the things. But as my dad started his business, and I was 4th, 5th, 6th grade, somewhere in there, my dad started his business, and he started working more, and then we stopped going to church as often, and so our family kind of started to drift away from church. And I understood what church was about, but I wasn't attending and didn't have a desire to go. If my parents weren't going, I was young. I would just do whatever, keep playing with the neighbor kids on Sunday mornings. And so finally, the summer before my freshman year, just a crazy series of events happened. Our church youth group, which was not large, maybe 15 or 20 kids, they were going to a summer camp, and they asked me if I wanted to. They actually came through our neighborhood, because that's basically who the kids in the youth group were the neighborhood kids. And they came through and asked me if I wanted to help go to this camp and set up for camp. And it was an August, summer Sunday. I was like, yeah, what the heck? I'll go over there and hang out with you guys and help set up tents and whatnot. And so I went. I have no idea. I don't remember how I got there. Probably one of the older students or parents drove me. And once I got there, and we were setting up tents, they said, "Well, we're going to be doing a barbecue afterwards. Why don't you stick around for the barbecue?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. I like to eat." So we had barbecue, and then say, "Hey, we're going to have a bonfire after dinner. Why don't you stick around for the bonfire?" I'm like, "Oh, okay." And they're like, "Why don't you stick around? Just stay the night." It was just this little pull. So I think I had my parents bring over my sleeping bag or whatever. And so, but that night around the campfire, God really showed himself to me again. And it was just sort of like I say, I knew it. I knew him. I knew of him, but this was like a pull on my heart that said, I want you to take me seriously, and I want you to take your journey with me and your walk with me seriously. And so I affirmed my commitment to Christ, sort of rededicated my life to Christ at that point. And it was interesting. I thought to myself, well, the first time I gave my life to Christ, it lasted 3 or 4 years, and I was kind of passionate about it. I wonder how long this will last. And but I at that point, I realized I needed to get into a much more active kind of church and youth ministry. I had friends of mine that were telling me about this church in town, and they invited me to come to that. And so my first Sunday there was also the first Sunday of their new youth pastor. And so he was like, "Hey, you're new, I'm new. How about I take you to breakfast this week and I want to get to know you." And so that was the first of 4 years. Every Friday morning, he and I would go to breakfast along with 3 or 4 other guys. And so we just kind of became these young men that he was discipling. And it was pretty phenomenal. We talked about life. We talked about the Bible. We talked about what it looked like to be young men who are Jesus followers. And it was wild when I think back about it. 4 years of that. And over the course of that time, I started feeling a sense of wanting to be involved, and I actually taught myself how to play guitar so I could lead worship for our youth group. And at that point in that newer church, the youth group was up to 40 or 50 kids, and with the youth guy and all that, and I became one of his key leaders. And he would challenge me to not only lead worship, but also to lead in some teaching and some devotionals and things like that. And it was interesting when I gave my life to Christ, and we were talking about it around the dinner table one night. Actually, there were several times after I gave my life to Christ as I was growing up where my parents would say, "Well, Brian, you ever think you'd want to be a pastor?" And my image of pastors were these nearly dead retired guys that were pastoring our churches, and I'd be like, no, they were all usually corny, just odd guys. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be that guy. And little did I know what was behind their question to me about ever wanting to be a pastor, because as I got later into high school, I mean, it was junior year, I think, I started to sense a calling into ministry, and I had this thought. This was one of those thoughts, again, that I thought, for my age and where my mind was at, I wasn't a deep thinker, and yet I had this image or this thought that it's that time of your life where you're thinking about what your career is going to be, and what are you going to pour your life into, and what are you going to give your life energy to, and all that. And I didn't know anything about calling. I didn't know anything about anything. I was just trying to figure out, what am I going to do with my life, because the guidance counselors at school are asking me and things like that. But I had this oddly deep thought for me, and that was, I don't want to spend my life and give my life energy to something that's just going to burn in the end. And I want to give my life to something that's going to have eternal value. And I was a junior in high school. I just don't feel like juniors in high school usually have those kinds of thoughts. But I take it as from the Lord, and it was a big part of my sense of calling. When I shared that desire to go to college, go into ministry, my dad sat me down and told me a story that when my mom was pregnant with me, she was having some complications, and they were very worried about whether I was going to be born healthy or survive birth or something. There was something complicating the birth, and so those were the days when they didn't allow doctors or dads to be in the delivery room. And so instead of just hanging out in the waiting room, he drove out to the church and he knelt at that altar, and that same altar that I knelt at, a few years later, but he knelt at that altar and he said, "Lord, if you'll allow this, birth to be successful, and for, my wife to survive it and be healthy, and for my baby to be healthy, I will dedicate him or her to your service." And so he shared that story with me, And it just was like this massive confirmation that the calling sense that I had, the prompting that I had was like legit. It was super affirming. And I asked my dad, I'm like, why didn't you ever share that story with me? I mean, that's like a pretty big deal. And he said, I never wanted to pressure you into it. I wanted it to come from the inside out, which that tells you a lot about my dad right there. So not manipulative, just a loving man. And he, after he told me that story, I just thought, okay. He said, but your prep in your journey to education, it's a long road to hoe. I remember him saying that. It was a funny expression. It was a long road to hoe. And I was like, well, God will help me. I was innocent enough just to go, I don't know what's in store. I'm not that great of a student. I was, I got B's, I was never really an A student. And so I just said, well, I'll take it one step at a time. And if God wants me there, I'll open the doors. And so that's what happened. I graduated high school and went to Taylor University to study. I started out as a psychology major because I wanted to understand people. And that also was just a huge fascination for me and a huge interest for me. I wanted to understand people and why they did what they did and why they behaved like they behaved and why they had the mannerisms they did and all that sort of thing. It was in my kind of intro to psych courses in high school. I was like, man, I love this stuff. So I majored in psych, and then once I got there and started in that, I also picked up a second major in Christian education. So I spent 4 years at Taylor University. Go Taylor. And that's where I met my lovely wife, and she was a upperclassman. I won't say how many years older than me she is. But my roommate at the time said, there's no way that Cindy Price will go out with you. And I said, well, we'll see about that. So I got to know her, and it's a much longer story than we have time for here. But we began dating, and then we got married 2 years later, and I still had 1 year left. And she went to work for the school, and winner, yours truly got a year's free tuition because she worked for the school. It's not why I married her. But anyway, after Taylor, I went to Paradise, California, and interned for a year. Cindy's dad, Roy, had just taken over the lead role there, and so they had an internship program. I jumped into that. As soon as I got there, the youth pastor resigned, so I became the youth pastor for the year. And I served for a year in that role, and then they knew it was just a 1 year term, and then I was planning to go to seminary. And so a year later, went to Denver Seminary, and that was, I squeezed a 3-year Master of Divinity into 4 years. Again, I'm a B student. And so I decided, though, that I wanted to enjoy, I was going to Denver Seminary, so Colorado was beautiful. I wanted to have some balance in my life, and I wanted to try to build that in while I was in school. Cindy got a job as a sales rep. She was working full-time as a sales rep. I was going to school, also working part-time. And I just took it at a pace where I wasn't feeling just completely stressed out. So that worked out to be 4 years. We ended up staying another year afterwards as we waited to see where God was going to take us next. And lo and behold, he led us back to Paradise. And so we went back as youth pastor, and I served as a youth guy for 5 years. I wasn't a very good youth pastor, but I was sufficient. And they had gone through some tough times at the church in the youth department. It was a moral failure with the leadership guy there, the youth guy there. And so really my counseling and my just my whole desire to have a kind of a therapeutic ministry was really helpful for that church in those days. So I served as 5 years, just kind of bringing healing, kind of as a transition pastor. And then we brought in a youth guy that was one of the best that I've ever seen. And so that was great. And I moved into adult ministry, and I served in that role for 4 years. And then I was executive pastor for 1 year before Cameron Park called. So I came here in November of 98, November of 98. And it's been an amazing ride. Ever since I had that feeling that if God wants me to go, he's going to open the doors and he's going to equip me and give me what I need to, answer his call. That's exactly what's happened here. I felt way out over my skis when I interviewed here, and I told the team that was interviewing me, I've never preached every week. I don't know if I have that much to say. I've never been a lead pastor. I mean, they took a big, big risk on me, and yet God was faithful. And Cindy and I literally poured ourselves into this role. When God made it clear, he basically made it during that interview process to where we could not say no. And so when we came and got started, we were both a little freaked out, but we were both excited, and we wanted to grow this church. And so we poured our heart and soul in it, and yet tried to do it with the most balance that we could, and to be fair to our families, because we were very aware, the whole rumor and reputation of PKs, pastors' kids they can be some of the worst, because there's all sorts of interesting dynamics that come along with the role and with the kids in the role and all of that. And so we really were determined to protect them from that and help their childhood be as normal as possible. And we just felt like that really unfolded well. We're thrilled to realize now that our 3 kids are all genuine Jesus lovers and genuine Jesus followers, and they're all serving the Lord in one way or another, and they're using their gifts. It's just beautiful, and so that is just a huge piece of gratitude that both Cindy and I have. And so it's been a wild journey. The church has been through a lot, and it's continued to grow. I'm just grateful. And so it's interesting now, as we are, in our 60s, and we are looking at, the time that I have left to serve is obviously less than what I have served. And so we're in this interesting season, of life, and our kids have all moved out of state, and we're happy for them. They're pursuing what they want to do and their loves and their callings. And so, this last spring, my mother-in-law passed away, not totally unexpectedly, but pretty much. And so that was a big life change, a big kind of situation change. And so all of that kind of causes you to do some reflection, and causes you to do, take some stock in kind of, okay, where's your life been? What have you done? You know what I mean? How have I spent my life, and all of that. And I have gratitude for all of that, but it also makes you ask that question, okay, what's the next season of my life look like? And God's been doing some interesting things in me as I think about that. And it's not so much instigated by thoughts of the future as much as I feel like what God's doing now, I have this vague sense that he's prepping us for something else. And I don't even know if it has anything to do with serving or the calling of ministry or whatever, as much as it has to do with, I sense Jesus is taking me through some things to deepen my trust in him, to deepen my reliance on him. It's almost like as my ministry life is starting to maybe wind down, or I'm in those last years of that, God is doing some maturing in me that I never saw coming, and quite frankly didn't know that I needed. And that's always annoying when God's like, "Oh yeah, you have some maturing." I'm like, "Oh, can't we just skip that part? I'm too old to mature." But he's been using some scriptures in my life that I knew of them and all of that, but it's just been interesting how in this season of life he's been using these scriptures. 1 Corinthians 13 is a very famous all for the love discussion, but towards the end of that, Paul says, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put childish things aside, childish ways aside. And my heart's been sort of marinating in that verse, in those verses, because I feel like God is maturing me in some ways in my faith. And Peter Scazzaro has written a book, The Emotionally Healthy Leader, and one of the things he talks about is you kind of come to these places in your life where you can be a little disillusioned about maybe not everything that you imagined that you would accomplish, you accomplished, or maybe there's been some disappointments, things unrealized, or things you're experiencing that you didn't think you would be experiencing because you thought, well, if I did A, B, and C, then D wouldn't happen, but then D does happen. And so there's this interesting sorting out of all of that God's taken me through right now in this season of my life, and I feel like He's prepping me, because that's been His pattern. He's always prepped me in my heart and soul for whatever's next, and I don't ever realize it until I'm in the next, and then I look back and I go, oh, that helped. Those years helped me. That experience helped me. So Scazzaro talks about, hitting the wall and some disillusionment and questions about God and questions about life and all of that. And I feel like both my wife and I have been swirling in that a little bit. And so that verse in 1 Corinthians 13 has kind of been swirling around a lot in my head. And the other passage is 2 Corinthians 5, where he says, we know in part. We see now as in a mirror dimly. In other words, you're not going to have all the answers. You're not going to figure it all out. There's going to be a fair amount of uncertainty, and you just got to trust me. And I feel like that's what God's been building in us, and being forced to learn trust is a very annoying thing, because we want what we want now, and I always figured that if I lived my life in a certain way, then it would insure me against certain struggles or whatever. Or if I lived my life in a certain way, it would assure me that I would experience certain things in the end. And I guess I just pictured this season of my life. I didn't have clarity, but I always imagined that it would be a little different than it is. And so God's been helping us sort that out. And I think that text in 2 Corinthians 5, where it talks about, we only see partly. Then, in the next season and in heaven, we'll see it all. We'll be known as we'll know as we're known and all that. But right now, we can't know. We can't know everything. So it puts us in a deep position of dependency. And for some reason, God still thinks I need to learn that, and so I'm trying to learn that. He says we're destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we're taking every thought captive for Christ. And so it's just that a sense of, okay, Lord, I'm putting my head down and I'm walking in obedience, and I'm going to continue that no matter what, even though there's a lot of things that I have questions about. So you'd think at this point in my pastoral ministry career, I'd have less questions, but I think I have more questions. But basically, at this point in my life, I want to finish well. I feel like the church is in a really healthy place. I want to continue to watch it flourish. However long I can have a contribution. I've told the staff I've always been that guy that is paranoid of staying too long. I never want to be a lid on the organization. I always want, if I'm in any way inhibiting its growth or maturity or expansion, I want to make sure I get out of the way. This is God's church, and He has a plan for it. And I've been called to be a steward for a season, and so I'm just doing my best to serve that way. And I don't know what His timing will be and all of that, but I want to kick through the tape and finish well. I guess if I was asked, what do you want? What would you want people to take away from your story? What would you want people to walk away with? What's the kind of the big idea? I think it comes down to no matter who you are, no matter what you're currently doing, putting your hand to, working at, seeking to accomplish, whatever role God has you in, if you're parenting or you're grandparenting or whatever, I guess I've been struck with the reality that it all really does come down to your heart connection with Jesus, no matter what you're doing, no matter how well you've done it, no matter how long you've done it. I think at the end of the day, I know, overused phrase, but at the end of the day, God just wants us. He wants me. He wants you. He wants our love, and He wants our heart. And He's going to use all the different things in life fundamentally to bring you close to Him. I really think that. And there's another text that's been rolling around in my head lately. Peter says, Jesus given all this hard teaching to His disciples, and He's going, all these disciples have left. Why haven't you left, Peter? Why haven't you gone away? Why haven't you deserted me? And He says something really simple that's been ringing in my heart lately, and that is, where else would we go? Where else would I go? You have the words of life. And that has rung so true to me. We can try all sorts of things to satisfy a hunger or satisfy a thirst or satisfy a passion or a craving or whatever. And no matter what it is, if it's not rooted in Jesus, it's not going to satisfy. And I love that line that Peter said, where else would I go? You have the words of life. And so that's what I would hope people take away from my story, is that God was in it all along, using all these various circumstances, and He does the same in your story, and He does the same in everybody's story. He uses it all for the single purpose of pulling you close and refining you and developing you and grooming you into all that you could be and what He created you to be, as it relates to a connection with Him.